looking at it right now, having lived through the last couple of years on this podcast, what I am most interested in is that when ChatGPT went public, it was seen as a consumer product, and that sort of framed the public's understanding of how AI would succeed in the marketplace, where there would be proprietary technologies that distinguish themselves as like standalone products. But now, fast forwarding 18 months, we're in a spot where all the LLMs are basically as good as ChatGPT. I mean, you can quibble with benchmarks here and there, but they're all pretty good. But they all still have the same reliability issues they had a year and a half ago, and those may never go away. And then, as far as the proprietary superintelligence end of the spectrum, the end of the spectrum that might transform computing as a whole, not only have we not gotten any hints that that's coming, but I haven't even gotten like a cocktail napkin sketch of what that might look like in the marketplace. And looking at all of this evolve, it's just interesting because if that status quo holds, I think the implication is that AI will power a bunch of new features that, to your point, empower humans, but also require humans to operate them. But it's not necessarily going to be like its own product, or at least that's how I'm beginning to set my expectations for what this might look like based on the last year of our podcast.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of points on that. So number one, AI is being unreliable. Humans are unreliable, right? I think I'm sure I've made this point on this podcast before, but this is where the self-driving car analogy comes in that I would bet every single self-driving technology out there, whether it be Tesla or Waymo or Cruise or whatever it is probably better than the vast majority of human drivers, right? Mm-hmm. But the problem is, the reason why it's not rolled out broadly is we hold computers to a different standard than we do humans, right? Like, no one gets mad if you ask your buddy some particular fact and they remember it wrong, or they say something that's mistaken. Maybe you'll give them a hard time, like, what, you can't even pronounce Johansson, right? But no one's actually upset about this. If I went to Google and I said, how do you pronounce Scarlett Johansson? And it comes back and says Johansson, I'm going to be pretty irritated, right?
Google, and I think train on the 1996 Washington Capitals.
That's right.
What happened
and
here?
So I think Google's dealing with that right now. Like, the AI generated answers, I find them very compelling and very useful. I'm looking at the overall average, the consistency with which they're actually surfacing information more quickly, but it's super easy to index on and point out the ones where it fails, particularly when you're trying to get it to fail. And we pick on computers in a way we don't pick on humans, right? And there's a lot of humans, I could push their buttons and get them in a state where they say something dumb, but I don't do that because I treat humans differently, right? Whereas Google, all type of million things in there.
The exact thing, that exact thing occurred to me last week when we were processing the internet, just freaking out about AI overviews. It reminded me of the Tesla example. And I said to myself, okay, so I guess we're just going to be doing this for the next 5 years, where anytime AI screws up, it's going to go viral and everyone's going to freak out. Even though Google getting 99.9% of things right at Google's scale is unbelievably impressive.
Yep.
But the mistakes are going to be magnified regardless, because that's just the way it works.
Yep. No, for sure. So that's sort of point number one. Point number two, the way I am thinking about the AI space, and is, on one hand, there are applications that are purely creative in nature. And this is sort of like, this gets at what makes humans unique. Is it creativity, or is it sort of this intent, or is it smarts, all those sorts of things? I think one potential takeaway is it might not be creativity, right? Like, if in an unbound space like image generation or essay writing or whatever it might be, AIs are already better than the vast majority of people. And in this case, there is no hallucination. Hallucination is creativity, right? Like it's two sides of the same coin. Like the images that are generated by these things, like I could not do in a million years. Maybe a great artist could, but how many great artists actually are there that have that sort of skill? Again, separating the sort of and there's a bit here. I talk about the unbundling of AI. What you see with these image generation is you do see the separation of intent and execution. You can intend to create a particular picture. If you don't have the capability to draw, you can't execute it. Now with AI, you do. And so the people that can be creative in the context of art are subtly different because there's no longer a gating function of being able to execute. There's a gating function of having interesting intent. And same thing with writing, right? Like, now I like to think that I'm a good writer and that is a differentiator, but in the long run of time, you can see that, you know, perhaps going away. The real distinction is going to be the intent in the, you know, as opposed to the, you know, the ideas you put in, as opposed to
the
necessarily
mechanics of sentence structure.
That's right. It is as opposed to the execution. So I think AI, we're well on the path, sort of, as far as pure creativity goes. The other aspect that I find AI to be really compelling and very clear use cases right now is when it's operating in a context of sort of built-in error checking. This is why I think that generative AI took off early in coding, which you would think is sort of counterintuitive. Coding has to be exact, right? Like when you're running a computer program, it is deterministic. How can a hallucinatory creative sort of agent help with that? Well, it's precisely because it's deterministic that it works, because it either runs or it doesn't, right? And so there's a testing regime in place to determine, and that testing regime can be operated by computers. And so you can efficiently test and see if it works. Now, this isn't super easy, right? I was talking to a friend who's thinking about this problem of like unit tests. If you have to call an expensive model every time you do a commit to run all these unit tests, your cost can balloon out of control very quickly. There's lots of work here to be done to do that better and more efficiently. But by having testing, it works. This is why, to me, the canonical use case that we've talked about is the Facebook ads and the Google ads, where they are generating the image, they're generating the headline for the ads. And what's happening? Those ads are actually being shown to users who are either clicking on them or not. It is a built-in testing function that quickly hones in on the creative that works, the headline that works. And so you have this huge amount sort of to make more money because it either works or it doesn't, right? So those are the two extremes: super deterministic, but easily testable by computers, and total creativity where there is no wrong answer. There is this vast middle ground. Right. Which is, you know, there's some degree of judgment involved, and there's some degree of like, I don't need a unit test, like, you know, a lawyer generating a brief, right? Like, how do you know the citations are all correct? You have to kind of go through and look them all up and click through them and sort of like,
well, it's interesting because in law, legal research with AI is actually pretty good, but you definitely need a human to be able to distinguish which cases are directly on point and really helpful, which cases might be orthogonal but helpful for a certain point you're trying to make. And then it as a citation checker, I recall AI being really, really good because it could just cross-reference everything very easily, and it's all pretty deterministic. And so that's an example of where, like, you don't really need a human to site check at a certain point because the AI is just excellent. Now, you're still going to put a human on it because you can bill for that exercise.
Right.
And
well, that
it's
is
useful
it is
to
an
have a
interesting business model sort of point. That's a potential point of disruption. But yeah, I mean, legals is closer to the deterministic point to your bit, but it's also it's a little fuzzier. And there's lots of functions that are fuzzier. And I think that it's going to take a while, it's going to take longer. Short term, very clear applications of pure creativity and pure sort of where there's a error checking function. That middle area, my sense, and again, this is my view, it might be wrong, is that you're going to have, and this is a lot of the sort of the agentic sort of discussion is about this, building AI agents. You're going to have a lot of stuff that demos really well. and is going to sort of consistently fall apart in the real world. And that's my sense of a lot of the people that are super optimistic about these models subsuming everything. Yeah, you can find incredible demos, incredible examples of where how did the AI is replacing humans. But then you get out in the real world and there's so many variables and so many things that in so much context that it's not going to work as well as we hope. And I could envision a long period in tech of sort of like a lot of money being spent to, well, we just need to solve this edge case, and you're solving edge cases for freaking ever. This is sort of the self-driving example is probably a good example here as well, combined with the sort of bias against AI, that just like the bias against self-driving cars, that is going to make this area take a lot longer than people think to solve. The more constrained you can make a use case and the more defined it is, and number one, the better you can put some sort of like error checking function in there, and then the less edge cases there are, the less likely to screw up. I articulated.
Honestly, that's another thought I've had is like we're seeing every $1 trillion tech company on earth try to create this generalized intelligence among their LLMs, and again, it is all pretty good and incredibly impressive.
The fact it works as good as it does is mind-blowing, right? We should not forget about this. Yes.
No, but I wonder whether using generative AI for more specialized tasks could be what actually unlocks more economic productivity, more reliability, whether you're talking about like medical research or modeling physical infrastructure or any sort of industry-specific task that doesn't require the models to ingest every piece of writing in human history to be effective.
Well, that's right, and that squares sort of the second circle, right? Which is, so circle number one is, why do I think AI is going to be massively disruptive, and yet I don't believe it's going to replace humans, right? We already went through that one. Number two is, I think AI is going to have a massive economic impact and is going to completely change a lot of businesses. And also, it's not necessarily going to be these large language models that do everything. It's going to be, and this is what I talk about, years to be done to productize this, to actually bring this capability to bear in all these different places is a tremendous sort of developer opportunity. And this is where I get to things like, Microsoft or the other platforms, like building sort of a platform on which to leverage this capability to do these sorts of things. Now, this is increasingly, I think, kind of a consensus view. I think for a while, everyone's like, well, AI is going to replace everything. And everyone's like, well, okay, all these defined sort of use cases. I think I've been here all along to a certain extent, and maybe I have more conviction in it. But, it's a humbling space, to your point. Like, would we have said we're going to be where we are 4 years ago, maybe 3 years ago? I think we're on the 3-year anniversary of GPT-3 sort of being released. But no. So where are we going to be sitting in 2027? Are we going to be like as cringe about this podcast as we were about our Scarlett Johansson pronunciation? That's very possible. But that is where my head is at currently. For better or worse, there was a little bit of sort of putting, a stake in the ground with this article. I just feel like I needed to sort of articulate big picture where I think things are at. And that's always risky because you might be totally wrong.